The real reason humans cook their food, and what it did to our brains. Somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago, a member of our ancestral lineage did something that no animal had ever done before. They held food near a flame. Not to warm themselves. Not by accident. Deliberately. And what happened next, the smell, the texture change, the taste, triggered something in a brain that was already beginning to be different from the brains of every other creature on the planet. We don't know exactly when it happened. We don't know who did it first. But we know this: cooking changed everything. Not just for the human body. For the human mind. This is the story of how fire transformed us from the inside out. Let's start with what you actually are. You are, by almost every measure, a profoundly strange primate. You have a brain that is roughly 3 times larger than it should be for a mammal of your body size. You have a gut that is dramatically smaller than it should be for a primate of your size. You have teeth that are too small for an animal that has to survive on raw food. And you spend more time sleeping than almost any other large mammal, not less, more, because your brain, that enormous expensive organ, consumes roughly 20% of your total energy while you're doing absolutely nothing. You are expensive to run. Extravagantly, almost improbably expensive to run. And the question that has puzzled anthropologists and evolutionary biologists for over a century is simple: how? How did an animal this cognitively expensive survive? Where did the energy come from? The answer is fire. Not fire as warmth. Not fire as protection from predators. Fire as a food processing technology. The most consequential food processing technology in the history of life on Earth. The scientist who made this argument most forcefully is Richard Wrangham, a primatologist and biological anthropologist at Harvard University. In 2009, Wrangham published a book called Catching Fire: How Cooking Made Us Human. His central claim was radical when he made it and remains compelling today: cooking did not merely change what humans ate. It changed what humans are. Here is the core of Wrangham's argument. When you cook food, you break it down before you eat it. Heat unravels the protein structures in meat. It ruptures the cell walls in plant matter. It gelatinizes the starches in roots and tubers. All of this work, the mechanical and chemical breakdown of raw food, is work that your digestive system would otherwise have to do itself. Raw food is hard to digest. The calories in raw food are difficult to extract. Studies on raw food eating humans, people who eat exclusively uncooked diets by choice, consistently show that they lose significant body weight and struggle to maintain it, not because they're not eating enough food by volume, but because their bodies cannot extract enough energy from uncooked food efficiently. Cooking predigests food before it enters your body. It extracts more energy from the same amount of raw material. And that extra energy, those additional calories that cooking makes available, is what paid for the human brain. Let that land for a moment. The organ you are using right now to process this information, the 3-pound structure that generates your thoughts, your memories, your sense of self, your ability to imagine futures that haven't happened yet, that organ exists, in the form it currently takes, because somewhere in the deep past, one of your ancestors held meat near a flame and discovered that it tasted better cooked. The evidence for when this happened is contested, but the fossil record tells a clear story. Beginning roughly 1.8 million years ago, a new species appears in the human lineage, Homo erectus. And Homo erectus looks different from everything that came before in ways that align precisely with what you would expect from an animal that had recently begun cooking. The face becomes flatter. The teeth get smaller. The gut shrinks. The body gets taller and more energy efficient for long-distance travel. And the brain gets bigger. Not gradually, as part of a continuous slow trend. Bigger, in a relatively rapid jump that coincides with the period when archaeologists and anthropologists believe fire use was becoming established in the human lineage. Wrangham argues this is not a coincidence. The shrinking gut and the growing brain happened at the same time because they were the same event, viewed from 2 directions. Cooking freed up the energy the gut no longer needed to spend on raw food digestion, and that freed energy was redirected into building and running a larger, more complex brain. You could not have the brain you have without the smaller gut. And you could not have the smaller gut without cooking. The three things, fire, gut, brain, are a single package. They evolved together, driven by the same pressure, enabled by the same discovery. And this is where it gets strange. Because what cooking did to the human brain is not just a story about size. It's a story about what a larger, better-fed brain started to do with itself. A bigger brain in a social species is not just a faster computer running the same programs. It is a qualitatively different thing. It creates new capabilities. New ways of modeling the world. New ways of modeling other minds. New ways of planning, communicating, cooperating. And here is the feedback loop that changed everything. Cooking required cooperation. Think about what cooking actually demands. It demands fire, which has to be maintained, which requires sustained attention and shared responsibility. It demands that food be gathered, brought back, prepared, and distributed, social behaviors that require trust, communication, and coordination. It demands that individuals wait for food to be cooked rather than eating immediately, a form of deferred gratification that requires impulse control and planning. Every one of those requirements is a driver of social complexity. Every one of them selected for greater cognitive capacity. And every one of them was simultaneously made possible by, and made more powerful by, the larger brains that cooking had already begun to build. Cooking didn't just fuel the brain. It created the social and behavioral conditions in which more brain was useful. There's something else cooking did that almost no one talks about. It freed up time. A chimpanzee. Our closest living relative, an animal with roughly the same body size and broadly similar diet, spends somewhere between 6 and 8 hours per day chewing. 6 to 8 hours. Every day. Simply processing raw food mechanically with their teeth and jaws because that's what it takes to extract enough nutrition from an uncooked diet. Early modern humans, equipped with cooked food, spend roughly 1 hour per day eating. 1 hour, compared to 6 to 8. That is 5 to 7 hours per day freed from the mechanical necessity of chewing. 5 to 7 hours that had to go somewhere. Time that became available for everything else, for social interaction, for play, for story, for toolmaking, for art, for the long slow conversations around a fire that may have been among the first sustained acts of human culture. The campfire, in this reading, is not just where cooking happened. It is where human culture began. Where stories were first told in the dark. Where relationships were deepened by shared warmth. Where the social bonds that made large-scale human cooperation possible were first formed and maintained, night after night, over thousands of generations. Richard Wrangham and others have argued that the social dynamics of cooking, the sharing of food, the gathering around a fire, the rhythms of preparation and eating together, may have been among the earliest foundations of human pair bonding, of extended family structure, of the proto-social contracts that eventually became human communities. You eat together. You become a group. You become a group that trusts each other. You become a group that can do things together that none of you could do alone. All of that, potentially, started with fire. And here is what makes all of this more than just fascinating history. You still do it. Not just in the literal sense that you cook your food, though you do, and your body is so profoundly adapted to cooked food that switching to a fully raw diet would leave most people unable to maintain their body weight long term. But in the deeper sense, you still gather around fire. Not always a real fire, sometimes a screen, sometimes a table, sometimes a kitchen. But the impulse to gather, to share food, to sit together in the warmth, to talk in the time after eating. That impulse is not random and it is not merely social convention. It is ancient. It is written into you at the level of biology, because the animals who did it survived better than the animals who didn't. The ones who gathered, who shared, who cooked together, who told stories in the dark, those are your ancestors. All of them. Every single one. The ones who didn't gather, who ate alone in the dark, who hoarded food, who refused to cooperate around the fire, those lines tended to end. So tonight, when you sit down to eat, when you smell something cooking, when you gather with other people around a table, when the meal ends and no one immediately leaves because the conversation is still going, understand what is actually happening. You are doing something your species has been doing for at least 1,000,000 years. And the brain you are using to enjoy it, to taste, to appreciate, to connect, to remember, to feel grateful. That brain was built, in part, by exactly this. By fire. By food. By the decision, made so long ago that it has become biology, to cook.